Hello, my writer friends. Welcome back to Write with Intent. I'm Mindee Arnett, science fiction and fantasy author, here sharing with you all the tips, tricks, and tools of the trade that I've learned on my publication journey in order to help you along with yours. Today we're going to be talking about how to pick your main character for your story. So let's get started. Okay, so let's talk about your main character and how incredibly important and difficult it can be to pick the right one. So I generally have a vague idea about my main character based on the story idea that I've already developed. You know, we talked about in the previous vlog, the 2 sticks to start a story. Usually by having that situational idea about the story, I have a sense of who the character is going to have to be in order to play a part in this setup that I've got going on. So that helps, you know, if you have your situation, like if you know that you're writing about, for example, when I wrote Avalon, I was writing about teenagers, professional spaceship thieves that run around on a ship. So I knew that they were going to have to be a teenager. I knew, you know, some basic ideas. But when it came down to actually selecting my main character, the first thing I do, which is going to sound really obvious probably, is that I have to pick somebody that's interesting. Now, I don't necessarily mean likable, but simply interesting. Somebody that I'm going to want to spend hours and hours and hours with when I'm writing, you know, these pages. So fun. Because I tend to write very close, up close. I write in third person most often, but it's usually very close. So I'm spending a lot of time in this character's head. Not only am I spending time in their head, but I'm kind of pretending to be them as if I were an actor, trying to understand their motivation. So it just needs to be someone who has something about them that I find very interesting. Either, a lot of times a job they have. So like with Avalon, the main character, Jeff, was the leader, the captain of the ship that does all the spaceship stealing, which of course is really interesting and fun. Who doesn't want to, fly around in a spaceship and steal things? No, just kidding. So he's interesting, but that makes it easy for me to zero in on him as the main character. And the same thing happened with my latest novel that's coming out, Riven. The guy is a mercenary, and he is a contract killer, which is maybe not fun, but definitely an interesting job, and comes with all kinds of moral questions that I like to explore. Anyway, so he was an easy person to pick as a main character. But once I have the main character selected, it most certainly does not stop there. There's a lot of other things I've got to figure out before I can even sit down and start writing my story. Now, moving forward, I'm going to share with you 2 resources that I rely on quite heavily for this part of my writing journey. And I will link them in the show notes. The first one is Michael Hauge, who is a screenwriter. He deals primarily with screenwriting, but he is actually more like a script consultant, and he works on scripts, and he does a lot of, he tours a lot and does a lot of talks. You can go and see him if you're in his area, whatever. So he is talking more specifically about film, but he does address writers and novelists and have some of his material as well. And the second material is Jessica Brody, who wrote Save the Cat Writes a Book. Wait, no, that's not right. Jessica Brody, Save the Cat Writes a Novel. Excuse me, I was distracted by my cat. Just came walking through here. Heard that book, by the way. We'll talk about this more in depth in a future video. I love it. It's great. There's a lot of things that are very useful. So I will mention more specifically what I use of that for the character part of this in a little bit. So once I have who my main character is based on them being interesting enough that I want to spend time with them for, 6 months or however long it takes to finish. We won't talk about how long my last book took to finish because I was writing it during 2020. So yeah, it took a long time, forever, you could say. So once I have my main character and who this character is, they've had to have a name at this point. I usually name them first. Then I start thinking about, I need to know 2 other important pieces. The first one, of course, is the outer journey that the characters is going to go on. So Michael Hauge talks a lot about outer journey and inner journey, and that the characters are going to go on both. So they're going to go on the outer journey, which is kind of the goal of the story. It's the story events, it's the plot, it's the things that happen. That is the outer journey. So for example, in I like to rely on film. So we're going to talk about Shrek.
I'm making waffles.
The outer journey that Shrek is going on is that he has to go and get the princess, bring her back in order to get his swamp free of all these fairy tale creatures from Lord Farquaad. So that is his outer journey. So generally speaking, I find the outer journey is pretty, well, okay, for me, is a lot easier to decide because I've already spent time gathering my sticks, my story ideas, and building my fire. So I have an idea of what the outer journey has to be, just based on these story events that I've set up, usually the situational things, the things those ideas that are combustible to me are usually about the story events. And so I have an idea of what the outer journey is going to be. What I don't have an idea of usually when I start is the inner journey. So again, Michael Hauge talks about how characters are going to go through both. Now, the inner journey is a journey of transformation. So rather than going out and, winning the princess and rescuing her from the dragon, the inner journey is about learning something about yourself. The character learns something about themselves that changes the way they view the world, that changes the way they see themselves, that ultimately should make them a better person for having gone through this outer journey that they're going through at the same time. So the two journeys happen together, and they're important that they complement each other, and that you can use the outer journey events to build the inner journey as you're going along. Now, that's going to be specific to your outer journey, and I'm not really going to get into those details, but hopefully that kind of just makes logical sense. So again, picking the inner journey is a lot harder. And the first place that I usually start with is what Michael Hauge calls the ghost.
Who you gonna call? Ghostbusters!
Or what Jessica Brody refers to as the shard of glass. It's basically the backstory that's something traumatic that's happened to the character in the past, that has shaped them into the person they are right now. And usually that person is a broken person or an incomplete person.
Said you've got no arms left. Yes, I have. Look, it's just a flesh wound.
Or a person with a serious mental problem. Not, a mental problem as in, they like in Shrek's case, he thinks he's not worthy of love. He's not worthy to have friends. He has a lot of hang-ups about the fact that he was born an ogre and has been treated like he is a monster all his life. Okay, so he's had people scream at him and run away, and he's internalized these things, and that is what has created his mental hang-up. Essentially, his inner hang-up. Let's call it that, for lack of a better word. You have to identify the ghost, because that's what creates the problem, the mental problem that the character must overcome or transform out of in their inner journey. So picking that is important in terms of who the character is and how you're going to take it, or how they're going to change. Excuse me. So it's really difficult in some ways to pick, not only to pick the right ghost, but to pick the right interpretation of the ghost. And let me give you an example from the book that I'm working on right now. I have a character whose father was ousted out of this important role in her city, in her town, and was replaced by somebody else. And the father was sent off to jail. And as the writer, as the storyteller, I know the real story about what happened, why he got sent to jail. And I started writing the first chapter with my insight into this backstory moment and letting it infiltrate my main character. And then I got to the end of the first chapter and I was thinking about it later. I'm going, this isn't right. My main character doesn't have the same insight that I have, and her ghost, her shard of glass, this heartbreak that's happened to her would have affected her differently, because she doesn't know the things that I know, if that makes sense. So I'm going to have to spend the next couple of days going back over that first chapter and changing that and making sure that I have the correct interpretation of the ghost in order to make the inner journey transformation complete. So if I had left it the way I'd originally written it, where she kind of already knows that what happened to her father was unfair, or that something nefarious was going on, her inner journey would have been a lot simpler, I believe, and it's kind of how I foresee it coming, because she would already have been halfway there to what she needs to learn about kind of examining the world around her, and whether or not the story that she's been given all her life, that, the good is good and bad is bad, she needs to learn how to question those. It's kind of where the ghost is going to take her on her inner journey. those are three things I need to know. I need to know the outer journey, inner journey, and the ghost, which of course, and then of course the fourth thing would be the problem that the ghost creates. I do tend to struggle the most with coming up with that problem. I think Jessica Brody in her book, Save the Cat Writes a Novel, breaks it down really well on kind of how to dig in and figure out what in the character's history and their interpretation of these bad things has created their problem. So I would really recommend looking at that. But I also like what Michael Hauge talks about it. He identifies the problem as either a want or a need. Hi guys, just wanted to take a second to correct myself here. It is not actually a want and a need that Michael Hauge talks about, but rather a longing and a need. So a need, which is confusing because Jessica Brody uses similar words. So anyways, I'm hopefully not confusing you, but I recommend read both of them. So anyways, the need is something that is missing in the character's life that the character doesn't know. So for example, in the Shrek example, Shrek does not know that he is living a pathetic life and that he's lonely, because he's internalized these things. So he's not aware that he has this need, that he needs to heal who he is. He needs to learn, the whole onion thing, peeling, blah, blah, blah.
Ogres are like onions.
He needs to learn that he's worthy of love and that he is better off with friends, then he needs help, all these things that he's going to have to learn. Well, he doesn't know that in the beginning of the story. This is all internal. It's all an unconscious thing. And that is what Michael Hauge would call the need. But sometimes you have characters that don't necessarily have a need, or you can't identify it as succinctly as that. And so what he talks about is that instead they can have a want. Now, a want is usually, and sometimes they can have both. So a want is usually something that they say that they want to do, but they're just giving lip service to. That's kind of how he describes it. So for example, Rose in the Titanic, she's saying, I want to be free and I want to, live this great life, but she's just saying it. And when the time comes to actually do it, she's hesitant. And she's been just thinking about it all her life and not actually following through. So that is another way you can kind of get at identifying and pinning down that problem. One other resource from Michael Hauge I want to share that I use quite a lot would be being able to identify, he has this really great sentence, and I'm probably going to butcher it, but let me try to break it down. It has to do with character identity, and getting at identifying who the character is in the beginning. I find that, again, that's the hardest thing to do. Like, it's easier to identify who they're going to be at the end, but understanding who they are in the beginning is harder. And he has this sentence that I will often try to it's like a Mad Lib sentence, and I'll try to fill it out ahead of time. And it says, I'll do whatever I want, whatever it takes to get what I want. You got to identify that you fill in the want, but just don't ask me to do blank, because that's not me. So that is when you can fill in what I want to do. I'll do anything to get what I want, but I won't, because it's just not me. When you've identified the just not me, you've identified the identity that's kind of keeping your character stuck in this rut, and you've identified the problem that they need to get over. Okay. So yeah, hopefully that makes sense. It will make more sense if you read the books that I'm recommending, but hopefully at least it will give you this. I've given you some tools to think about different ways to approach this in your novel. And again, as always, the most important thing is to be very intentional about what you're doing. It's the lesson I'm still learning, as I just explained in my first chapter, going off the rails with my main character's understanding of her shard of glass being incorrect and being too much like mine. Again, I probably should have been more intentional about that before I even started, but at least I'm getting intentional about it within that first chapter, and then I'm going to go back and fix it. Because remember, you guys, writing with intent is where it's at. And when you start to get this down and you start to recognize these things, it's going to be your breakthrough moment, and then your novel is going to be just waiting there, and it's going to be awesome. And I can't wait. And I hope that you find this useful. And I hope that you keep tuning in, and I hope that these keep getting better than what they actually are. Anyways, so thanks for tuning in, and remember to write with intent and live with intent. See you next time. Bye.